All right. Hello again, adventures, and welcome to another exciting daily December vlog. This is daily December 2024, day 26, and today we're going to talk about boring business tax stuff. Because I need a drink first. Drink. The reason being, there have been some arguments in the political sphere about the idea of tariffs. And the one thing that I've discovered is the vast majority of people that are talking about tariffs have no idea what a fucking tariff is, nor do they understand how international business works or anything involving that. I had a conversation with a friend recently, and the idea of tariffs was brought up, specifically as to how it's going to drive up costs for everything in the U.S., which is 100% untrue. It is more complicated than that, but the basis of it is everyone that is telling you that tariffs are just going to screw over American businesses is either is a moron or is intentionally misleading you to make you think less of the incoming presidency. Now, whether you are a fan or not does not matter in this particular case, because we're not going to be talking about the incoming presidency. I specifically want to talk about what are tariffs and why do countries use them. Specifically, why is the U.S. you use them before? Why are they considering using them now? And why, when they were announced, did both Mexico and Canada immediately send their leaders to talk to the incoming administration, begging them not to implement them? It's so weird that it's going to screw us over, and yet they're worried about it. Oh my God. So, for anyone that doesn't know, a tariff is basically a tax on imported goods. Like, that's the long and short of it. It is a tax that is specifically targeted towards specific kinds of imported goods. And the purpose of a tariff, despite what most people will try to claim, is to help domestic businesses be able to compete with foreign producers. So what do I mean by that? So, one of the things that the U.S. has that a lot of other countries don't have is we have remarkably robust employment laws that prevent a lot, not all, but a lot of ways that other countries use to exploit their workforce. We have child labor laws, we have overtime laws, we have minimum wage laws. These are not universal things. And depending on the country, I'm not saying that we are the only country in the world that has this, but there are a lot of countries that don't have those protections. And a lot of those countries are some of the largest importer or largest exporters to the U.S. And the reason why is because they don't have those protections. They can make the goods significantly cheaper than we can make them here, even with the cost of shipping. So the reason so many U.S.-based companies import things that they could get right here is because it's cheaper for them to import it than it is for them to buy it literally next door. If they had a factory, like let's say you have like a car manufacturer, and they import the rubber that they use from Venezuela or Brazil somewhere. I actually don't know the major exporters of rubber, but I know rubber comes from trees and they've got lots of them down there. So if you had a car manufacturer and they had a rubber plant right next to them that had their own rubber trees, that they were making their own rubber, it would still be cheaper for them to ship it thousands of miles and use imported rubber than it would be to use the rubber of the factory next door, for a number of different reasons. One of which is volume in general. A lot of other places just have significantly larger manufacturing bases than we have here due to a bunch of different reasons. Another is, again, those lack of labor protections. And I'm not saying that Brazil and Venezuela don't have labor protections. Those are just two random countries that I pulled out of the ether. I have no idea what their labor practices is. They were just two countries in South America. And again, I know there are rubber trees in South America, or at least I believe there are. So this is not me trying to say that those countries don't have labor protection or anything like that. They were just two random countries. Do not get mad at me about this. And then there's a number of other kind of more minor things like taxes that the U.S. Imposes on certain companies, tax breaks that the U.S. Imposes on other things. Like it's remarkably complicated. What a U.S.-based company is doing is they are basically looking at, okay, I need, to use easy numbers, I need 1,000 tires. And if I buy them from next door, it's going to cost me $20 a tire. None of these numbers are real. I'm making them up, but I'm using simple numbers so everyone can understand. None of these numbers are real. This is not how much a tire costs. So I need 1,000 tires. If I buy them next door, it's $20. If I buy them from random country that doesn't quite have the labor protections that we do, it's only going to cost me $5 a tire plus overall $10 a tire to ship them. So I can pay $15 a tire to $15 a tire to import them, or I can pay $20 a tire to not import them. Well, for 1,000 tires with a $5 difference, that's paying $5,000 extra for the exact same material. So most businesses in the U.S. are basically going to have a spreadsheet, and they're not going to have just two options. They're going to have depending on what they're looking for, they could have as few as maybe like 3 or 4 different options, or they might have 20 or 30 different places that they can get the exact same goods. And they might import from different groups, different amounts of the exact same product, because they're able to get good deals if they buy a certain amount, but the deal gets less sour if they buy more or less. Or it may be just an idea of, well, this company is a little more expensive, but we need 1,000 now. This company is cheaper, but they can't, and they can give us 20,000, but it won't get here for a month. So we'll buy 1,000 now to deal with our stuff here, and then we'll do 20,000 there. In order to get the cheap price that we want here, we have to agree that every month we're going to buy 1,000 from them. There are lots of different things like that. Business is remarkably confusing. So what a tariff does is a tariff takes that, oh, we can pay $15 for this, or we can pay $20 and stay in the country. Well, we're going to pay $15. That's just stupid. Why would we pay more for the exact same product? Tariff does is it just increases the end cost. So now instead of paying $15, it's now $21, or maybe it's $25. So now instead of saving $5,000, you're going to spend $5,000 more. Well, then it becomes really, really simple. Why waste the time? It takes longer to get it shipped. We have to deal with customs and everything like that can make things go longer. There's always a chance that something could go wrong. We're just going to buy from right next door. That is the entire purpose of tariffs. It is not to punish other countries. It is to create a situation where U.S.-based countries U.S.-based companies can actually compete with foreign companies as far as price-wise and the things like that. So tariffs, you charge them more money to bring it in. No. And I saw this clip circulating for like a month where this person goes, man, so many people don't understand what tariffs are. Tariffs, U.S. companies pay the tariffs. It's not the other countries, U.S. companies. And the guy's on there is good. Wait a minute. No, I thought the other country. No. The U.S. is charging us more for these. It's the stupidest thing ever. That is a true statement. It's not the stupidest thing ever. It's actually a remarkably intelligent process. But it is a real thing. Tariffs are paid by the importer, not the exporter. Well, why? Why can't we just charge the exporter? How? Well, we charge them. How? We send them an IOU? Well, it has to go through customs, right? How? How are you going to make the person that has already shipped it pay more? They're not at customs. They've never been in customs. They're nowhere near the U.S. They're in a completely different country. Well, we should charge them more. How? So this is the issue with taxing other countries. The only way that taxing other countries works is if they let you. We do have treaties with quite a few other countries where we are allowed to tax citizens and companies of other countries on income that they make in the U.S. Those only exist because their government will enforce those taxes. The U.S. has no power, no authority, and no ability to tax anyone outside the U.S. And if they did attempt to extract money from another country, bare minimum, it would be an international incident that could lead to massive problems. Because again, the only way to force these people to pay is either for them to voluntarily give you the money or for us to go over there and take it. And if you don't think the idea of the U.S. sending a bunch of people to another country to take money from one of the citizens of that country is not going to cause really big issues, then you really need to reevaluate how you view world politics. It's never going to happen. So there's no possible way that we can actually charge the exporting companies unless they agree to it. And what company in its right mind is going to go, oh, well, in order to make it easier for another company to compete against us, we're just going to voluntarily pay you more so that we'll lose business. That sounds like a really solid business investment to me. Well, why don't the governments enforce it like the other the tax things? Because it would ruin their GDP. These exports make every single company money, and because those foreign countries, the exporters, are paying taxes when they are exporting it to the actual company or country that they live in, the country is making money off of those exports. So anything that they do that will diminish those exports will lose that country money, and they don't want that. It's one of the if you guys have ever seen like there's a phrase is like cheap Chinese knockoffs. The reason that exists, China doesn't acknowledge copyright laws from other countries. They have their own copyright system, and they will enforce their own copyrights in other countries because there is this thing called international copyright law. But they actually don't recognize copyrights from other countries. And so that's why there's so many kind of cheap knockoff goods, specifically from China, because violating copyright law, as long as it's from a different country, violate Chinese copyright law and you're in trouble. But as long as you're violating a copyright law from a different country, China doesn't care. Well, why can't we just sue them? Because in order to do anything to a Chinese citizen, the Chinese government has to say, okay, we will let you do that. And that's true about every other sovereign nation in the world. In order for the U.S. to we can try this one more time. In order for the U.S. to enact any sort of punishment on a foreign national that is not on U.S. soil in some way, shape, or form, the country that they are currently in has to agree to allow the U.S. either to come in and get them or has to take that person and give them to the U.S. somehow. Countries that do that, the process of taking a foreign national and sending them to our country is called extradition. We've seen actually quite a few different things with extradition, specifically with like Julian Assange. There was that whole extradition trial and finding out that's called extradition, and countries that we have quote unquote extradition treaties with is basically we signed an agreement that if somebody breaks one of our laws in that country has agreed, okay, well, we will use our police force to find them, we will arrest them, and then we will ship them off to you. That's what an extradition treaty for. And extradition treaties in and of themselves are remarkably complex, and a lot of times they only cover certain crimes. And one of the things that has become a much bigger topic in the world market is the idea of capital punishment, or the death penalty. There are a lot of extradition treaties that we have with country that specifically say, hey, yeah, if somebody commits a crime against the U.S. and they're in our country, we will ship them back to you. We will use our police to find them. We will ship them back to you unless you're going to kill them, and then we won't. So going back to the idea of taxes and tariffs, there's no possible way for the U.S. to be able to tax the exporters. So the only way to create a competitive market for U.S.-based business is to tax the importer. And they do that by imposing what's called a tariff. Because the importers are U.S.-based companies and therefore are required to pay U.S.-based taxes and are under the jurisdiction of U.S. law, the U.S. not only can impose taxes, but tariffs, they can actually enforce them. If you don't pay the tariffs, they can send the IRS after you. You can be arrested, go to jail, all of those things. None of that is possible in any other country. Well, it still sounds like a really bad thing for us because it just means that everything that we get is going to cost more. Yes and no. That's where tariffs get really, really complicated. So the benefit of tariffs, first of all, is U.S.-based companies make more money. So why does that matter? Well, again, remember when I talked about the reason that other countries are not willing to tax their exporting companies for the U.S.? It's because they make money off of the exports. Anything that is manufactured in a company and sold in a company, for the most part, is going to be subject to some sort of tax somewhere along the line. And depending on how complicated the tax code is, there can be multiple places where something is taxed. In the U.S., our tax code is unbelievably complicated. I saw a statistic on Twitter recently, so take this with a grain of salt. But the actual tax code itself is thousands of pages. And somebody did the math. If you spent 5 hours a day, where the only thing you did for 5 hours a day was to read the U.S. tax code, it would take you 67 days to get through the entire tax code using the average reading speed of a normal American. That's bonkers. Our tax system is one of the more complicated tax systems in the world. I don't know if it is the most complicated tax system because I haven't studied taxes in other countries. I did have to study a bit of it here for my business degree because understanding specifically business taxes is really important. And when you are talking about taxes for businesses, there's multiple places where a single product can be taxed. You have payroll taxes. Payroll taxes are just blanket taxes that when you pay something or when you pay someone, the employee has to pay a portion of their income to various payroll taxes, and the employer has to pay at least as much, if not more, on the same pay. So if you get paid like $1,000 a week, if I remember correctly, when I was working in retail, I think somewhere between about 23 to 30% of my check went to payroll taxes, etc. So use easy numbers. Let's say it's 30%. Again, this is not exact. The numbers have changed. I haven't worked in over a decade, but to use easy numbers, let's say 30% of your check goes towards that. So that means your take-home pay is only $700 a week. However, when your company pays you, they're required to pay you the $1,000 because that's how much you earned. But for every dollar that they pay you, they have to also pay the government. So while you're getting 30% of your check taken away, they're actually paying you about 30% more because part of their payment is to also pay those payroll taxes. So while you're only seeing $1,000, which is exactly how much you're supposed to make based on your hourly wage or your salary or whatever like that, the company is technically actually paying you $1,300, but $300 of it is going directly to the government before you even see it. So that's one way the U.S. can tax a good, because when it's being manufactured, anyone that is touching that good is paying payroll to the taxes. Now, there are also manufacturing taxes just in general, things like property taxes for the stuff. There can be taxes on every single machine that is purchased. There is taxes that are not only have to be paid on the machine, but they also have to be paid on the value of the machine. And there's actually remarkably complex ways you depreciate the value of machines and other things like that. There is income tax for business. There's business income tax, which is basically a tax on the profit that they make. It's not the total revenue, it's the profit. And depending on how good you are with math, you can actually reduce your company income tax to a very, very low rate, or even get it zeroed out, depending on how you use certain things like charitable donations, reinvesting in the business. Like, there's a bunch of different tax write-offs. That's one of the reasons why people claimed that Amazon, for a little while, they claimed that Amazon paid $0 in taxes. That was a bold-faced lie. They pay more taxes than almost any other company in the country. However, they paid, I believe for a year, they paid either next to zero or zero income tax, because through a bunch of charitable donations, reinvestment in the business, and a bunch of other tax loopholes that exist for everyone. Anyone can use them. They're just remarkably complicated, and a lot of times require you to put a pretty large investment in for them to be beneficial to you. They didn't pay any tax on their quote-unquote income because, according to the IRS, they didn't technically make any income. Any additional profit that they made was immediately reinvested in the business, which no longer counts as profit. Well, that sounds like cheating. No, it's actually really, really beneficial, specifically for small businesses, because it's a really easy way. Like, let's say you run a restaurant, and throughout the year you make, $500,000. And your costs were only about $360,000. You have $140,000 in profit that year. Well, profit gets real expensive to tax, and you need to replace your ovens because you got used ones when you started up the company, and you want to expand because you're not quite, like, you've really tapped out at $500,000 a year, and you're never really going to be able to work there. So you're going to build an addition to the dining room. All the money that you spend on getting new ovens, putting an addition to the dining room, hiring new staff, things like that's all tax deductible stuff. And that means that businesses that are already in massive amounts of debt, because your average business doesn't actually show profit, quote unquote, isn't actually in the black, which is if you're running at a deficit, you're in the red. If you're running at a profit, you're in the black. And normal businesses don't actually start showing numbers in the black for anywhere between 3 to 5 years from them starting. And most small businesses, I think it's like 50 or 60% of small businesses fail within the first year. So most small businesses never see a penny of profit. So anyway, so getting back to the idea of tariffs and how they're screwing over the American economy, man. They're not. Basically what happens is, now that the US-based companies are actually competitive with the foreign companies, they are going to increase their production. So they are going to, instead of a tire manufacturer again, let's say normally that tire manufacturer only really does small local jobs, because smaller businesses only need like 25 tires at a time. Are never going to be able to get the volume enough to be able to order from these foreign suppliers. So they normally only do orders of 25 tires at a time, which doing small orders invariably increases your costs. Anytime you can do larger orders, you're going to be able to save money through a bunch of different things if you're a smart businessman. Well, now they've got an order for 1,000 tires a month. So instead of doing all these little 25 tire orders, now they can do one bulk 1,000 tire order. They can ship it all in, one or two very, very large trucks instead of having to ship it constantly using a bunch of very, very small trucks, which makes shipping costs go exorbitantly high. They're able to manufacture them all at the same time. And they don't have to change their machines around, so that these huge, huge orders are cheaper to make, they're cheaper to ship, and they make them more money. Because of that, that company, if it's smart, they can actually reinvest a lot of that money into the business. They can get more machines, they can hire more people, they can expand their operation, and all of that makes money for the U.S. government, because instead of a foreign company making all of those things, we have a domestic company that's making them. In addition to that, it helps drive the cost of the goods from the domestic companies down a little bit, because they can give better deals to these large corporations because they're buying in bulk. And it also means that now we actually have competition between US-based companies. And competition in a market will always introduce one of two things: either an increase in quality or a lower in the final cost to the consumer. Competition is always good. There's never a situation where competition is bad for the consumer. Competition generally not remarkably great for the manufacturers, but for the consumer, the end product person, it's always good. So what does this mean for the standard U.S. consumer? If these tariffs go into effect, which, based on the negotiations that we've been seeing thus far, there's a good chance that the tariffs may not go into effect. Because, again, something a lot of people don't know, Canada, something like 80% of their GDP is exports to the U.S. If the U.S. stops importing their goods, Canada goes bankrupt. Mexico is not quite as reliant on U.S. trade. They have other countries that they trade with, but Canada is extremely reliant on U.S. trade. So it's one of the reasons why Justin Trudeau flew down here to talk to Trump, was because if this works the way that Trump intends it to do, which is basically increase the number of manufacturers in the U.S. and decrease our reliance on imports, Canada's fucked. And so in order for this to not happen, Canada is going to have to come up with some amazing sweetheart deal, because they really don't have the cards. The country itself is not doing particularly well right now. They've been working at a deficit for quite a few years. They've been bragging about how their euthanasia program is saving them so much money. They're killing off 5% of their population a year and bragging about how much money it saves them. That's how screwed this country is right now. What is it going to mean if the tariffs go through? Well, short term, we will probably see maybe a slight cost increase. Now, I say maybe because the cost of goods is not, and this is something that a lot of people just seem completely incapable of understanding. The price that you pay has nothing to do with the cost of manufacturing it. The people that decide on the prices have no idea how much it costs to make. Pricing is a marketing strategy. And there are multiple marketing strategies, or there are multiple pricing strategies that you can use for the exact same product. And it changes the price drastically. And it doesn't change the cost of manufacturing at all. So the idea that the goods costing more to produce is somehow going to make all of us pay more money is not rooted in any sort of economic theory ever. It's just people that don't understand economics and how business works trying to make you upset. Do companies sometimes transfer increased costs of production to consumers? Yes. It ends poorly every single time. I don't mean that every single company that's ever done it has gone under, but it erodes public trust in the company, and they start losing market share very, very quickly. They also make it extremely easy for the marketing teams of their competitors to completely destroy them. So, are we going to see an increased cost of good? It's possible. It's probably not going to be massive, and the fact that we will see a huge increase in GDP, in jobs, like when U.S. companies start producing more things, they need more physical bodies to be able to produce them. So we'll see an increase in the number of people that have jobs, an increase in the actual money in the market as opposed to just printing more money, which creates inflation, which is why we've had like record high inflation for the past 4 years, because we were printing money during the period that shall not be named, by just artificially infusing, giving people thousands of dollars. That created this massive amount of inflation. If you want to actually increase the amount of money in a market, you need to actually create more work, more goods, more GDP. If anyone doesn't know what GDP is, gross domestic product. Basically, it measures the everything that's made and sold in a country. It's GDP. So for anyone that's freaking about tariffs are going to make everything more expensive, probably not. If we have more people working, which means there's more money available and less people are having to rely on government subsidies and things like that, the market starts to balance a little bit more. People start making more money in general. The government has more money to be able to do other things. Our economy gets better. And that means that your take-home pay is going to be better, which will then translate you to being able to buy more things. So why aren't all these companies going to just charge us more because now they're paying more for this stuff? Because it's economic suicide, to be blunt. They might increase it a little bit at first, because there is a limit as to how much a company can absorb in additional costs. But it's a pretty big limit. I think a lot of people are unaware of the things like people made this huge deal when the Twitch sub, the tier 1 sub, went up like $1. Like, oh my god, this is horrible. How could it have been? The tier 1 sub had been $5 for, what was it? Decade and a half? If you think that the cost of running Twitch did not get higher in a decade and a half, you're crazy, especially with rampant inflation, with the two major economic recessions that we've gone through in the past, 12-ish years. Or I guess 2009 was the last one, so that's what? 15 years ago? Yeah, so yeah. In the past 15, 16 years, we've had two major economic recessions and a couple kind of smaller, kind of minor recessions in there. If you think that, and Twitch has grown by leaps and bounds. If you don't think Twitch is paying significantly more money to be able to run than it was before, you're bonkers. But for, again, like 15-ish years, they didn't increase their quote-unquote prices for that because they could absorb a lot and they were still making money. It wasn't great money in Amazon as a whole. I think I've heard rumors that I've never been able to substantiate that Twitch has not made any money for Amazon. I don't believe that because Amazon would have sold it if it wasn't. But it's not a massive money maker for Amazon like the Amazon website is, where it's basically printing money for them. So yeah, companies can absorb an increase in cost without ruining the company. And the larger the company, the easier it is for them to absorb an increase in supply costs. So do I think prices are going to increase exponentially to where no one's going to? In no way, shape, or form. I think over the next, again, if the tariffs actually go into place, which there's no guarantee that they're going to, if the tariffs actually go into place, my theory is we might, and I stress might, we might see a slight increase in the cost of manufactured goods. So goods that require, that used to be using imported supplies that are now buying domestically. We might see a slight increase in those specific things. Everything else is, over the next couple of years, is going to get cheaper. Because if the tariffs work the way that they're supposed to, which there are a lot of economic scientists that have actually looked at tariffs that have been imposed in the past, and there's a lot of people that claim that tariffs have never worked or tariffs have been really amazing. Like there's study after study that contradict each other, because economics in and of itself is closer to a soft science than a hard science. If you're not familiar with those terms, chemistry is a hard science. If you mix this much of this chemical with this much of this chemical, it will create this particular chemical reaction. And the equations to figure that out is called stoichiometry. Really fascinating stuff. A soft science is like psychology. Psychology is, well, PTSD is this very specifically defined mental disorder. However, if you put 30 people in the exact same situation, each person will have a completely different reaction to that situation. And if it is a bad enough situation that it could cause some version of PTSD, not all 30 of those people will get PTSD. And of the small subset that will get the PTSD, each one will manifest in a different way. Psychology is still a science, but it is a soft science because there aren't hard formulas that you can use to be able to figure out everything. Economics is halfway in between a hard science and a soft science. There are concrete formulas you can use to predict a lot of different things in economic markets and the things like that. But because humans are involved in the economy, nothing is set in stone. You could have a brilliant, a perfect supply-demand curve that tells you the exact price that you're supposed to price something to get the maximum profit. And the one thing that you can't anticipate is a TV show coming out that portrays a good that looks similar to yours in a negative light, and it completely shatters your supply-demand curve, and now you have to reevaluate your pricing strategy and everything. Economics is confusing. What's not confusing is tariffs are not these evil things that is, the U.S. government cutting off its nose to spite its face. It is the only method the U.S. government has to make domestic markets be able to compete with foreign markets that have less protection for their workers. The U.S. is never going to be able to compete with countries that don't have child labor laws, because you can pay children significantly less than adults. They're never going to be able to compete with countries that don't have overtime laws, that don't have minimum workday laws. All these things that make it so that working in the U.S. is not quite as horrible as it could be. It's still not great. But all of those the things means that it's more expensive to make stuff in the U.S. than it is to make it in a lot of other places in the world. And the places where it is the cheapest to make it are generally the places that have the highest exports to the U.S. So I hope this assuages some people's fears about the idea of the tariffs. They are not this evil thing of the government punishing the U.S. It is actually tariffs are actually a very beneficial thing to U.S.-based companies. The only people that tariffs actually hurt are companies that are currently exporting from countries that don't have the worker protections that we do, which a lot of people would consider unethical. So yeah, the people getting quote unquote punished by this. Oh, and what happens to the foreign companies? It's like, well, they're getting away scot-free. No, because when U.S. based companies stop ordering from them, they lose money and their countries lose money. And that's one way that labor laws can be changed. If foreign countries realize that the U.S. is always going to import a tariff if they don't have child labor laws, let's just say, well, then they're going to start implementing child labor laws. The U.S. is one of the largest markets in the world. We buy more goods than almost any other. I think we might buy more goods than any other country in the world. I'm not 100% certain on that. But we are definitely in like the top 5, top 10 of countries that buy more than anything else in the world. We're one of the largest countries in the world by population. And our country has one of the highest amounts of disposable income of most countries in the world. And that means we buy a ton of shit. So I hope this makes tariffs a little bit easier for some people to understand. They're not evil. They're an economic tool. And they're also not permanent. Generally, tariffs are created to create a specific style of change. And once that change has happened, they will remove the tariffs. So we need to see how this is going to play out. But freaking out and crying and everything about how tariffs are going to ruin the economy, they're not. We've implemented them before, didn't ruin the economy in any way, shape, or form. Again, critics will argue if it was a net benefit or a net gain. But there has never been a recession or a depression that was blamed on tariffs, ever. That's just not what they do. In general, when they work the way they're supposed to, they actually promote economic growth inside the company and kind of slow economic growth outside of the company or country. And that's what they're designed to do. They're not designed to help the entire world. They're designed to help the U.S. And we're not the only country that uses them. Again, because there's no way for a country to tax an exporter in another country, the only solution most countries have is some sort of a tariff system. Or they have to have some sort of economic treaty with that country where the country itself will extract taxes from its own citizens and then pay it to that other country. And in general, that only happens on things like income taxes. It really doesn't happen that often on imports or on exports, because it's just not worth it. Most countries would go, that's a stupid idea. Why in the world would I pay you to make me lose money? Why, that's stupid. I'm not going to do that. So yeah, it's all for me today. See you guys next time. All right, bye bye.